Hello guys, this is me Simo Orahara, and in this video I will talk about an event that many of us were expecting when the chapters about Ichigo going to the Royal Palace were releasing, and I'm talking here about Ichigo meeting the Soul King. Of course, I have already made a video about the identity of the Soul King according to the novel and the chapters in which the Soul King appeared after chapter 612, with his body separated from his legs and arms, and also the fact that some Shinraita represent his body parts such as Girard, his heart, Pernida, his left hand, and there is Mimihagi, his right hand. And it appears like that Kobo has imagined the story of the Soul King this way. But I think, and I have a theory, that Kobo may have previously had another scenario about the Soul King, but for some reason he changed it and came up with the idea of the body parts. And to clarify the idea that I want to reach, we must go along these 3 points. First, let's forget what is in the novel. Let's consider that the events of the novel and its narratives about the Soul King does not exist. Second, we will analyze together the chapters that were only about the Soul King in the first 66 chapters of the last arc. Why? And here we will get to the third point that many may not know, especially those who read the last arc in one go, is that after chapter 546, Kobo surprised everyone with a hiatus of 2 months, and it was announced by the Shonen Jump. And I think it's the longest hiatus Kobo ever had, because before the beginning of the last arc, there was a hiatus that lasted 3 weeks. And in those 3 weeks, Shonen Jump was publishing an interview of Kobo per week about the last arc, and in those interviews he gave us the grand lines of the final arc, and it said that Kobo was planning for the final arc for 5 years. But only after 66 chapters, Kobo surprised everyone by taking 2 months off. And according to Kobo and this translation, he said that he did this in order to prepare for the last battle. And here it was weird to say you will prepare for the last battle when you already said that you had planned this arc for almost 5 years with its details, and you gave us almost everything about what you are gonna do in the final arc. So we will discuss the chapters that were released before Kobo took that hiatus, because I do think on that hiatus Kobo seems to have abdicated some events in order to finish the manga in 3 years. This may be because of his illness or his illness and something else. So let's begin. To start, for years there has been a controversy about the identity of the Soul King, starting with Aizen when he talked about it at the end of the Soul Society arc, and also when Rankiku and Yamaji talked about it, meaning there has always been this question: is the Soul King a real person, or is just something or thing as described by Aizen in the last scenes of the Arankara arc? But with the arrival of the Zero Squad for the first time, things started to become somewhat clear, and the beginning was with the chapter 517, the first public appearance of the Zero Squad. So when Ichibi looked at the members of the Guti 13, what did he say? He said, "This time, and fulfilling the will of the Soul King, we are here with the goal of rebuild the Guti 13 again, but first, Kurosaki Ichigo, you will come with us to the Royal Palace." So through the words of Ichibi, it is clear that the Zero Squad came to the Guti 13 with the will of the Soul King. And Ichibi adds, before anything, before even thinking about the Guti, which represents the first defense of the Soul Society, there is one more important thing, which is Ichigo must go with them. And through the sequence of events in that chapter, Ichigo notes that Shuchara took Byakuya and Rinji, who were seriously injured, so he thought that if their going is related to treating their injuries, then he doesn't need that because his injury is not that fatal. He can get treatment here. And here the monk answers with a serious face that differs from his usual fun face, and said, "I'm aware of that. The reason why you are coming with us is completely different." And so in the next chapter, Ichigo asks Ichibi about the possibility of reforming the Tensa Zangetsu in the Royal Palace, Ichibi answers that they can't do that by remodeling the broken sword and making a new one identical to it. In other words, if Ichigo's reason was only to reform the Tensei Zangetsu and knowing his strength, Ichibi would have answered that this was the reason why he will go with them to the Royal Palace. In other words, Ichigo's reason for going to the Royal Palace was for something more important than the reform of the Tensei Zangetsu. What is it? And here Kobo starts hinting with scenes that may seem normal, but they are all heading in the same direction, which is the Soul King interest in Ichigo. For example, if you remember when Kirinji was preparing to send Ichigo to his palace through that strange way, there Ichigo pronounced an important sentence and said, "Where am I going? Will I meet the Soul King or what?" Kobo here passed a simple glimpse about the possibility of a meeting between the Soul King and Ichigo. And Kirinji denounces it and says, "It is impossible for a man like you to meet the Soul King." And Kirinji did not rule out the possibility that Ichigo might meet the Soul King, but the way Ichigo bluntly spoke and how he immediately thought about a meeting between him and the Soul King made Kirinji nervously utter these words. Anyway, at this point Hikofune also adds something really important and said, "Ichigo, it is true that you are now in the Royal Palace. However, this area surrounding us is only a path to the actual Royal Palace. And those huge plates are cities in which we have palaces entrusted to us by the Soul King as their guardians. And the cocoon that is above these plates is the Great Palace, where the Soul King lives." Notice how Ichibi, Kirinji and Hikofune talk about the Soul King as a person, and that's not all. If you remember, Ichigo visited Kirinji's palace in ascending order, from the last plate, and then he ascended to Hikofune's plate, and then to Nimaya's plate, and then there is the palace of Ichibi, and after that we find the Grand Palace of the Soul King, meaning that through the context of the events, Ichigo was on his way to meet the Soul King. But let's stop at the chapter 519. Ichigo went to the first palace, which was Kirinji's. In the same chapter, on the last page, was the first appearance of the Soul King. The servant says, "Did you wake up, your majesty, Soul King?" And Kobo painted the Soul King with his entire body, with his hand, arms, with his feet, with everything. And this is the most important point in the matter, which contradicts everything that came in the novel and beyond chapter 546. I mean, the page is in front of you, is the shape of the king, and no interpretation is accepted. Kobo drew his hand and legs. And what about the servant saying, "Did you wake up, your majesty, Soul King?" Why do you think the Soul King woke up? Simply to meet Ichigo, because he knew Ichigo was coming to the Royal Palace. And I still have more. Because in the next chapter, when Ichigo's training with Kirinji was completed, the latter, when he felt that distinction of Ichigo, he said it frankly, "I now understand Ryu-sama's interest in him." So as a preliminary summary, I do think that through these chapters, Ichigo would have met the Soul King. It is possible that Kobo had a different perception of the Soul King and that he was without body parts. Evidently, when these chapters were releasing, almost everyone, and I was one of them, I was waiting for that meeting that might happen between the king and Ichigo and what it will ensue. This was a natural thing. In a sense, after Ichigo acquired his new blade, he was going to the monk palace and then he would meet the Soul King, and there may have been a big surprise like Yuhaba in his relationship with the king or the king himself, who knows? And this was going to make the arc towards another dimension, but Kobo for some reason decided to expedite the second invasion of the Quincy immediately after Ichigo acquired his new blade. Because don't you think that there is something missing in Ichigo's going to the Royal Palace? After the chapter in which Ichigo acquired his real Zanpakuto, Kobo immediately jumped until Ichigo had finished his training. And when was Ichigo's appearance after chapter 542? It was in the first chapter after that hiatus, and also in chapter 555. So I think in that hiatus, Kobo may have abandoned the idea that Ichigo would meet the Soul King, and that the king wasn't interested in Ichigo and it contradicts everything that has been said in these chapters I have mentioned. The evidence is that the first appearance of the Soul King, after that hiatus, Kobo painted him without legs, without hands. And in chapter 519 he painted him with his full body. Someone might say Kobo only made mistake in drawing the Soul King. This way you are really underestimated Kobo. Kobo might make mistakes like any other mangaka in drawing some things, but I think it is impossible to make a mistake in drawing an important character for her first appearance. There is no doubt that he was drawing his legs and his hand and his entire body while he was fully conscious and knowing what to do. If the hands of the king had fallen from millions or thousands of years, how did he draw them in the chapter 519? I think if Kobo really had a clear concept on the issue of the right and the left hand, he would have drawn the king from the beginning as he did in chapter 612. Someone might say, no, Kobo did this so as not to reveal the secret of the parts being cut. Again, you really underestimated Kobo. Is Kobo a new mangaka so that it is difficult for him to find a way to hide the king's body? He could have just shown us his head. Look guys, I do believe that what happened to the final arc of Bleach, and especially after the chapter 546, is because of that hiatus that Kobo took after that. I do think in that hiatus Kobo was trying to compress events in order to end the manga as soon as possible. Maybe because of his illness, or his illness and something else, as I said before. But what I'm sure from is what came after that hiatus had a bad effect on the manga. And if you have the time and read the first arc from the beginning, you will find Kobo's writing wasn't the same after and before the chapter 546. So as a conclusion, if Kobo really intended to make Ichigo meet the Soul King, I would have really wanted to see that and know the secrets of Soul King interest in Ichigo. So what about you guys, and see you in my next video.